We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's Asylee Benefits Orientation held by the Asylee Outreach Project here at HIAS. First off, I do want to let you all know that we have Spanish interpretation available today for you to listen to. If you press on the interpretation button on the bottom of your screen, I'm going to go ahead and let the Spanish speakers joining us know about this, and then we will get started. Hola y bienvenidos a esta orientación hecha por el Proyecto de Asistencia para Asilados de HIAS. La presentación de hoy se llevará a cabo en inglés, pero hay interpretación en español disponible. Entonces, si prefiere escuchar esta presentación en español, por favor haga clic en la figura de un globo terráqueo. Esto se encuentra al fondo de la pantalla, donde dice interpretación y seleccione Spanish para español, y estas direcciones también están en el chat. Now, moving into today's presentation, I'm Amy. I'm the Asylee Outreach Specialist at HIAS, and I am joined by one of our attorneys here at HIAS, Cynthia Katz, who is here to address any legal-oriented questions that you all may have during the presentation that are better answered by an attorney. So I'll let Cynthia introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cynthia Katz, and I'm the supervising attorney at the New York office of HIAS. It's a pleasure to be here today. I come to you with many years of immigration experience, both in the private sector as well as the government sector, and of course now with the nonprofit sector of HIAS. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. And speaking of the questions that I mentioned beforehand, if you would like to ask a question at any point during the presentation, please do so by clicking on the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will be addressing any questions that are submitted during the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Now, today's orientation will provide you with the following. It will provide you with information about asylum and your asylum documents, immediate next steps an asylee should take following an asylum grant, the benefits and services available to asylees, as well as how to access these. And then we'll conclude with a few additional pieces of really critical information that asylees should be aware of. And please feel free to take pictures or screenshots of any of the information presented today, but also know that I will be sending an email out after this event with the recording of this orientation, as well as a copy of the presentation, including any of the links that I mentioned today. So let's first start with the basics. That is the asylum documents that you should have now that you have received asylum. For those asylees who received asylum through a USCIS asylum office, you should have received both an asylum approval letter as well as a small paper card called a Form I-94 with an asylum stamp on it showing that you received asylum status. And both of these are your two proof of asylum documents. If you are an asylee who instead received asylum through an immigration court, you will have a different set of documents. You should have received an order of the immigration judge as your proof of asylum document, but you did not automatically receive a Form I-94 card. And the I-94 is an important document that shows your asylum status as well as the date that you were granted asylum. And it can also be very helpful when applying for certain documents, such as a Social Security card. So it is recommended to obtain a Form I-94 just to have as that additional proof of asylum document. Now, to receive a Form I-94, you will need to call USCIS to make an InfoPass appointment with the local USCIS field office near you to obtain that card. And to do that, you can call the 1-800 number on your screen, which is the USCIS Contact Center's number. When you call, you can explain that you are a recently granted asylee through the immigration court and that you need to set up an appointment to get your I-94. And you will want to have your documents, including your order of the immigration judge, with you when you call, because they will ask you for your A number as well as other identifying information. Also, please remember that it is very important to take care of all of these documents. It can be very difficult and expensive to replace them. And these documents do help verify your asylum status, as well as the date that your asylum was granted. And you will need a proof of asylum document in order to access benefits for asylees. They will also be important to have when you apply for permanent residency, also called a green card, in the future. So please do not write on, laminate, or modify them in any way. And please make sure to keep your asylum documents as well as your social security card in a very safe place at home. If you do ever happen to notice any sort of error on your I-94 card after receiving it, you would need to contact your local USCIS asylum office by email in order to get that fixed. And you can search for the contact information of your local asylum office on the USCIS website in order to find the specific email that you should contact for your local area. So those are the documents you should have now as an asylee. And here are those important next steps you should take now that you have received an asylum grant. So as mentioned, again, for those who received asylum through the immigration court and do not have an I-94 card, an important step is to obtain that I-94 by calling USCIS and making an appointment. But a second step that all asylees will need to do if they have not already done so is to obtain an unrestricted social security card. Now, some of you may currently have a social security card, but if you have not updated it after your asylum grant, it likely lists a restriction such as valid for work only with DHS authorization, like the example in the upper picture. This is a restricted social security card, and you will need to update it to an unrestricted card that does not list a restriction, like the card shown in the lower picture. So having an unrestricted social security card will be important for accessing certain public benefits like food stamps or Medicaid health insurance. So if you currently have one of these restricted social security cards, or maybe you don't have any social security card yet, you will need to make an appointment with your nearest social security office to obtain that updated card. And in order to make that appointment, you will need to call the Social Security Administration's National 1-800 customer service number to make that appointment to obtain an unrestricted card in person at your nearest office. Now, Social Security offices are largely open to walk-in visitors. However, these offices do prefer that people make appointments ahead of time if possible. And that's just to ensure that you are, in fact, able to receive services. And when you go to your local Social Security office, you should take with you a form of photo identification, such as an unexpired foreign passport or a driver's license or work permit, depending on what you have, your asylum approval letter or order of the immigration judge, and your I-94. Now, unfortunately, some asylees do run into the situation where when they go to the Social Security office for their appointment, the staff there may not be familiar with asylum status and the documents that asylees can show in order to either update or get a new card. So to prevent this from happening, I actually recommend that asylees take a copy of the information that appears directly on the Social Security Administration's website, explaining the documents that asylees can show to get a Social Security card. And specifically, it is the part that appears on this slide, under their refugees and asylees section. So that is something just to be aware of in case you do run into that sort of situation while going through the Social Security process as an asylee. As another next step, you'll also want to apply for asylee benefits and services. As an asylee, you may be eligible for a variety of time-sensitive benefits and services funded by the U.S. Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR, through your local resettlement agency. So what sort of benefits and services does this include, and for how long are you eligible for them? The first of these benefits is free refugee health screenings, which are available up to 3 months after your asylum grant. These health visits are similar to medical checkups. They include screening for a variety of health conditions, and if needed, can include referrals to specialized health services like dental or eye care. And really helpfully, they can also provide you with information on how to obtain medical insurance. So it is really important to take advantage of these health screenings, not only for health purposes, but also because it may help you complete some of the vaccine and medical record requirements for your future permanent residency application. Another of the main benefits offered to eligible asylees is refugee cash assistance, which is available to individuals for up to 12 months after the asylum grant. Now, there are income eligibility requirements to receive this cash assistance, so your eligibility for this and the amount that you receive will depend upon your income as well as your household size, so that's something to be aware of. A third benefit available to asylees, also up to 12 months after the asylum grant, is a short-term health insurance program known as Refugee Medical Assistance, which provides health insurance for asylees who are unable to access Medicaid. So for those of you who instead meet the income eligibility requirements to qualify for Medicaid, you should apply for Medicaid instead, and I will be speaking more about that in a few minutes. And then finally, asylees may be eligible for a variety of refugee support services for up to 5 years after their asylum grant. And these include things like free English classes, job training programs, and employment support services to either help you find a job or find a better job if your current one is just not a good fit. And finally, you may also qualify for case management services. Now, case management can really include a whole host of services, but a few examples are things like helping you apply for public benefits like food stamps and Medicaid, helping you find rental assistance or new housing arrangements if needed, and assisting you with making an appointment at your local Social Security office, among other services. And for those of you who have professional degrees from another country that you're hoping to get evaluated and potentially re-credentialed, the resettlement agencies may also offer you degree evaluation services to help you gain recognition for that completed level of study. Now, after the 5-year period ends following an asylum grant, asylees would unfortunately no longer be eligible for any of these benefits and services for asylees through their local resettlement agency. Now, as you can tell from the timeline I just outlined, all of these benefits and services are only available to you for a specific amount of time following your asylum grant, and they are only available through local resettlement agencies. So in order to access benefits for asylees, it is really important that you reach out to your local resettlement agency as soon as possible, or if you are an attorney or caseworker, that you let your client know of the existence of these and help them connect with resettlement services as soon as possible following their asylum grant so that they can really take full advantage of the services offered to them. Now, if you're unsure where the resettlement office nearest you is located, you can always visit the Department of Health and Human Services webpage linked on the screen to see a list of resettlement agencies in your state and in your local county area. I do want to note that if you happen to live in the state of Maryland, please instead make sure you reach out to us, the Asylee Outreach Project, so that we can directly connect you with a resettlement agency in the state, and so we can help ensure that you are able to access these benefits as well as other local post-asylum grant resources. Now, resettlement agency services are free, and they're also offered in your preferred language, either by staff at the agency or through interpretation services. And when you contact your local resettlement agency, please make sure you have an identification card and a proof of asylum document, which would either be your asylum approval letter, order of the immigration judge, or I-94. And don't worry if you do not yet have an updated social security card, because you do not have to have an updated version in order to enroll with your local resettlement agency. Now, in addition to these benefits and services for asylees that are only accessible through resettlement agencies, as an asylee, you may also be eligible for federal public benefit programs, which are programs that are not only open to asylees, but the wider population in the United States as well. And here are a few common examples of these benefits I'd like to highlight. One that I mentioned before is Medicaid, which provides health insurance coverage to low-income individuals and their families. I'll be providing a bit more information on how to obtain Medicaid, as well as other forms of medical insurance on the next slide. There are also a few temporary cash assistance programs that families with dependent children may be eligible for, such as Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, which provides cash assistance specifically to low-income families and provides additional support like childcare assistance and employment services. Another very common example is SNAP, also known as food stamps, which provides food assistance in the form of funds on a card similar to a debit card that can be redeemed for basic food items at your local grocery store or retailer. Now, it's important to be clear that receiving any of these federal benefits is not guaranteed, and instead eligibility will be dependent upon your income and household size. So what is the best way to apply for these federal public benefits? Well, if you enroll in a resettlement agency, they will likely help you apply for these as part of the case management services that they offer to you. But if for whatever reason your resettlement agency is not able to help you for these, with these, it's important to know that you can also apply for these federal public benefits directly through your local department or Office of Social Services. Now, going a bit further into medical benefits, it is very important to obtain medical insurance to avoid unexpected high medical costs as a result of emergency or non-emergency medical needs. If you are unable to afford private insurance, you and your family may qualify for a public medical assistance program known as Medicaid, which again provides insurance coverage to low-income individuals and their families. And for those of you who have children and are not income eligible for Medicaid, but are also not able to afford private insurance, there is another major medical benefits program known as Children's Health Insurance Program, or CHIP, which provides low-cost health insurance to children and families. Both of these medical insurance programs, Medicaid and CHIP, are administered by your specific state. So to apply for these, you can visit the U.S. government's health insurance website, healthcare.gov, to find information on the health insurance enrollment process for your state. Most states have something called a state-based health insurance marketplace, which helps people navigate that state's insurance enrollment system. You can see a few examples of these on the slide. If you want to find out whether your state has one of these through which you can apply for insurance, please visit the healthcare.gov website. If it turns out your state does not have a state-based marketplace, healthcare.gov will instead give you the opportunity to apply for insurance directly through the website. So I would really suggest visiting the website, even if you think you might not be eligible for federal programs like Medicaid, because there are also additional low-cost, affordable, subsidized private insurance options that you may be eligible for. So please do not let a lack of insurance stop you from accessing medical care, because there are free to low-cost medical insurance programs that you may well be eligible for. So here are a few more things you should be aware of about accessing benefits. First, when you reach out to your local resettlement agency, you may find that they currently have extended wait times, perhaps even several weeks in the worst cases. Now, this may or may not be the case with your local resettlement agency, but I did want to note that because we are seeing some of these longer wait times with some resettlement agencies right now, as they're working to provide services to a higher number of clients. So just be aware that it may take some time to get enrolled. And because of this, it is even more important to contact an agency near you really as soon as possible. Now, second, we understand that some asylees may have specific urgent needs or wish to get started on some items if they end up having to wait to be enrolled in their resettlement agency. So here are some things that you can get started on in the meantime if you do end up having to wait. First, you should get started on obtaining the documents I mentioned, both the I-94 card for those who received asylum through the immigration court, and for all asylees, the unrestricted Social Security card. Second, while there are certain benefits and services for asylees that you can only receive through a resettlement agency, as I mentioned during the slide on federal public benefits, you are able to directly file your application for public benefits like food stamps and Medicaid through your local department or Office of Social Services. You will want to visit your state's social services website for further information that's specific to your local area. Now, some asylees may be concerned that accessing these benefits will have an impact on their immigration status. So I want to be very clear that for asylees, there is no negative impact to worry about. Applying for and receiving benefits will not affect your asylum status, and it will also not affect your ability to apply for and receive permanent residency and citizenship. Now, moving on from benefits, as another next step, you will also want to apply for asylum status for your spouse and any unmarried children who are under 21 at the time of your asylum application. Now, remember that you do have up until 2 years after your asylum grant to apply for them to join you in the United States as asylees. And then just like you, your spouse and children would actually also be eligible for resettlement benefits and services for asylees through local resettlement agency upon arrival in the United States. And then lastly, after 1 year of being physically present in the United States following your asylum grant, you may apply for legal permanent residency, also often referred to as a green card. And then 5 years after the residency start date listed on your permanent residency card, you can apply for US citizenship. And an exception to this would be if you are married to a US citizen at the time that you were granted residency, in which case you would be eligible to apply for citizenship after only 3 years. And with US citizenship comes things like the ability to vote, eligibility for certain government jobs, the ability to obtain a US passport, and in some cases, the ability to sponsor additional family members. So here again are the most important dates you need to know. You can apply for permanent residency 1 year after your asylum grant. Remember that you have that 2-year deadline to apply for asylum for your family members after your asylum grant. And then finally, beginning 5 years after your residency start date, you can apply to become a US citizen. So now we're going to move on to the last few important pieces of information, which are really important for asylees to be aware of. First is that you have the right to work as an asylee. You have automatic work authorization that does not expire, and this is regardless of whether or not you have an employment authorization document, EAD, also known as a work permit. And when you apply for a job, you will be asked by your employer to fill out the form that appears on the slide called an I-9. On this form, you should check the fourth option called Alien Authorized to Work. And for the expiration date, you would write NA for not applicable, because again, asylee's work authorization never expires. So again, as an asylee, you do not need a work permit to be legally authorized to work in the United States. That being said, some asylees do prefer to have one just because it can make getting some documents, such as a driver's license, that much easier when you have that additional form of photo identification. But you are not required to have one to legally work in the United States as an asylee. When you are hired for a new job, you will be asked to provide documents to prove that you are legally authorized to work in the United States. There are a few different ways you can demonstrate your work authorization depending on the documents that you have. So first, if you do not have a work permit, you can instead show your employer the following 3 documents to demonstrate that you're authorized to work. First, a government-issued photo ID. Second, your social security card. And third, your Form I-94. Now, if you do have a work permit document, you would only need to show your employer 2 documents. First, the work permit, and second, your social security card. And then finally, once you receive permanent residency, you will only need to show your permanent residency card to prove that you are eligible to work. So you would only need to show 1 document. All right, so we know that asylees have automatic work authorization regardless of whether they have a work permit. But what do you do if an employer who's not aware of this tells you that you're not allowed to work? Now, even though all asylees are authorized to work in the United States, sometimes employers may not understand that. And sadly, this is a situation that sometimes does happen to asylees. So first, I want you to know that if someone tells you they cannot hire you because you are not authorized to work, first of all, they are wrong. And know that there are several ways you can help convince them that you are in fact authorized. One option is if you are working with a case manager at a resettlement agency, they can help talk to your potential employer. Another option is you can also show the Department of Justice's Right to Work flyer linked on screen to your employer, or you can call their free hotline directly for assistance. That number is also on the screen. So let's now talk about another document you may be planning to obtain, which is a driver's license or state ID. Now, the process to obtain a driver's license or state identification card is different in each state. So to find out about the process in your state, you should visit the website of your state's motor vehicles department or office to view the list of required documents, as well as to make an appointment. But generally, required documents include, but are not necessarily limited to, social security number, proofs of residency, a proof of identity like a photo ID, and often your I-94. And even if you do not want or need a driver's license, your state's motor vehicles office does offer additional identification cards other than a driver's license for those who would like an additional form of photo ID. Now, here are a few additional important things to know. First, you should be familiar with the United States Selective Service requirement. In the United States, all men aged 18 to 25 are required by law to register for the Military Selective Service, though to be clear, they will most likely never have to serve. To complete this registration, you will need to go to the Selective Service website to either register online or to your local US Post Office to register in person. If you fall within this category, please make sure to keep a copy of the proof of registration because you may need it to qualify for things like student loans and financial aid, and it's also very important for when you apply for citizenship. Another important thing to remember is to pay your taxes. Paying taxes is required by law, but it also actually benefits you as well because by paying for taxes, you may qualify for stimulus checks, tax credits, and tax refunds. Your tax documents would also be helpful to have as a proof of your income eligibility for different fee waivers. And if you need help filing your taxes, the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, which is the US agency responsible for collecting taxes, does offer free tax filing help for low-income taxpayers who qualify. And you can learn more about that at the IRS website linked here. Now let's talk a bit about travel documents next. If you travel outside of the United States, do not use your home country's passport. Instead, really the best option for travel is to apply ahead of time for a refugee travel document, which is valid for only 1 year. You will need to check with the country's consulate whether the destination accepts this document for entry, and also make sure to plan ahead because according to the USCIS website, this document does have a bit of a long processing time. It could even take around a year. And something that is very important to know is that visiting your home country can risk your asylum status, as well as hurt your chances of getting a green card or becoming a citizen. So we would really advise any asylee not to travel to your home country. And this is because if you return to your home country, you do run the risk of the US government no longer thinking your asylum case is genuine, which is a situation you of course want to avoid. And of course, you do not need any sort of travel document for domestic travel within the United States. And then one final thing to be aware of is if you move, you must notify USCIS within 10 days. This is a mandatory requirement by USCIS. And you must also notify the US Post Office within 30 days in order to update your mail delivery address. And this is a really important point because USCIS will not necessarily forward mail, including receipt notices or even green cards, even if you have changed your address with the US Post Office. So please make sure that you've changed your address with both USCIS and the US Post Office if you've moved. In addition, if you move, you should also notify your employer, your state's Office of Motor Vehicles, as well as the resettlement or social services agency helping you access services. All right, so that's it for the presentation portion. If you'd like additional information on everything Asylee benefits and post-asylum grant next steps, I would encourage everyone to check out our website, asyleeoutreach.org. There is a page specifically for asylees and a page specifically for attorneys that provides all of this sort of information. And we also have post-asylum grant packets and flyers that can be provided to clients who receive asylum grants, which may be helpful. And with that, we're going to open up to some questions. I'm going to see, I can see some of them have already come in, so we can begin with those, but do please keep them coming because we have more than 20 minutes to answer any questions that you all may have. All right, so I can see that someone asked whether this PowerPoint would be available and shared with all the people who registered. The answer is yes. There will be a follow-up email after this event, which includes this PowerPoint presentation, a recording of this event, as well as a link to our different flyers and resources from our project. So this is a question for you, Cynthia.
Okay, I'm ready.
Someone asked, and this has to do with the point that I was making about how returning to your home country can risk asylum status. Someone asked whether visiting your home country's consulate in the United States could also be risky in this way.
Yes, that could be risky. In fact, we always advise against it. A lot of people do not realize that when they step on the soil of a consulate or embassy, they are under the authority of that particular country. So we do not advise going to a consulate or embassy of that country, of the country from which you are fleeing persecution.
Great, thanks so much, Cynthia.
Sure.
So I see someone else asked a question and
Amy?
Yes.
It looks like Jonathan asked a couple of questions.
Yes, that's exactly what I was about to go.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. I'm happy to answer them if you like.
Sure. I saw that one of the questions, and I'm not totally sure exactly which form he's referring to, but perhaps it's the Form I-94. I think he said he went to USCIS, and they let him know that defensive asylum cases were, had nothing to do with USCIS. So what should he do in that case? Does that sound like it was a I-94 question to you, Cynthia?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And I would advise Jonathan, first, my question would be if he had an attorney, because the attorney who represented him in court, and chances are he probably did, should be able to assist him with getting his file transferred from ICE, USICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to USCIS, so that he could in fact obtain the I-94 card at USCIS during an InfoPass appointment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cynthia. And I think that touches on an important point on the I-94, that for those asylees who are listening who do have attorneys, who are still working with an attorney, ideally, if they could help you get the I-94, that would probably be the best option, because there are at times some obstacles like that. This is also a question for you, Cynthia. You may have an idea of what is the processing time to file for family to join as asylees in the United States after being granted asylum?
Unfortunately, the processing time varies, and it is, generally speaking, a long time. So the person who won asylum has the obligation to file the I-730, just like Amy mentioned, within 2 years of the asylum grant. With that said, the United States government may take a long time, and unfortunately, COVID has slowed down the processing of those applications. And remember, think of COVID not just in the United States, but throughout the world. So there's also, unfortunately, an increase in processing times at the US embassies abroad. So the most important thing is to file that I-730. And then this is when it's also helpful to work with an attorney, because depending on the individual circumstances, there's no guarantee, but depending on those circumstances, an attorney or some other legal representative may be in fact able to request that that petition be expedited so that the family is not waiting so long. Sometimes there are circumstances where a family is in particular danger, for example, where it does seem appropriate to expedite that petition to reunite the family.
Great. And I see another question relating to the risk of returning to your home country. Someone asks, is someone who is in the asylum process, someone who's requesting asylum, are they able to return home, or is this also, quote unquote, forbidden for them, and is it dependent upon, I think this person says, their reasons for asylum?
Well, it's always very difficult when someone who is requesting asylum returns to the country of claimed persecution. So, for example, when a person applies for asylum, page 1 of the asylum application does in fact ask your last entry into the United States. And during the asylum application process, either the asylum officer or the immigration judge who is reviewing that application will in fact ask that same question. So there, for example, there is also a backlog with respect to what's called adjudicating or processing asylum claims. So a person may be in the office for an asylum interview, perhaps 2 years, 3 years or more after the initial filing. So at that time, the officer or the immigration judge will ask, when is the last time you entered the United States? And if it's a date after you filed, that person will really have to explain quite simply, which is not a simple question to answer, but the question is, why did you leave the United States? And why, for example, did you return to the country that you say you were persecuted? So that will weigh heavily on the outcome of a person's case. And of course, these are all situations that differ on a case-by-case basis. So there is no such thing as forbidden. I always tell people, a person is allowed to leave the United States. The dilemma is getting back into the United States. So that question is going to be asked whether or not it's dependent upon the reason for asylum or not. So if a person does in fact decide, and I think most attorneys would recommend not going to that country, that person will be in fact expected to explain, why did you leave? And were you safe when you went back? What did you do when you went to the country? If you were able to return safely now, why can't you return and live in your country permanently? So I would be very cautious and would not recommend that a person do that.
Great. So I see one question that I can take that's more about asylee benefits. Someone said that they have had a couple of clients not receive their I-94 documents within the 90-day requirement to register for asylee benefits. Is this delay a frequent issue? So a few things with your question. There's actually not a 90-day requirement to register for asylee benefits. I believe the 90-day requirement you may be referring to specifically refers to a program called the Matching Grant Program, which is one of the employment programs available to asylees. For whatever reason, there has been some confusion with people thinking that there is a 90-day requirement based on that program, but that's actually not the case. For example, an asylee can be eligible for cash assistance programs up to 12 months after the asylum grant. And I have had many asylee clients who get connected after 90 days after their asylum grant, and they're still able to enroll with the resettlement agency. The other thing with this question is, if they have not received their I-94 documents, that's totally fine because they would really only need an order of the immigration judge in order to enroll in their local resettlement agency, because that serves as sufficient proof of asylum. I have a lot of clients who only have their order of the immigration judge, who do not yet have their I-94, and they're able to enroll in their resettlement agency. So hopefully that is a bit helpful. As far as delays for receiving I-94 documents, that is definitely a frequent issue, I would say. So you're not the only one seeing that. I can see another question from one of our clients here at the Asylee Outreach Project saying that they don't know who their caseworker is. So your caseworker will be the person who works with you at the resettlement agency. For your specific case, they haven't reached out to you quite yet since we just referred you to them. But trust me, you'll know who your caseworker is once they reach out. All right, so Cynthia, I think this is a question for you. Someone asks, what advice do you have for asylees/refugees who have waited an unusually long time for their AOS to be processed? I have clients who are still waiting 2+ years after the filing was received by USCIS.
Unfortunately, I think it's the same sort of answer, the backlog, even with respect to adjustment of status. We've seen that throughout the East Coast. I'm in the New York office. We've seen it in our Silver Spring office. Unfortunately, we are all caught up in that backlog. My only suggestion again would be on a case-by-case basis. And I know that the question says that there's highest clients who are waiting 2+ years. Unfortunately, that is not out of the ordinary. And again, I would encourage those specific people to reach out to the person representing them, whether it's an attorney at highest or an accredited representative, to just inquire as to the status of the case. But generally speaking, the United States, USCIS has just been a broken system, has been further broken by the COVID pandemic and still not able to recover to a normal, quote unquote, normal processing time. Sometimes, I'm sorry, I just wanted to add again, just like I said with the I-730 process, sometimes a case can be expedited, but the expedite criteria is very, very specific. And the reason why it's so specific is because the person has to basically persuade USCIS, with thousands of people waiting 2+ years, what makes your case distinguishable, that we should pull it out of the line and put it in front of somebody else's case. So that's what goes into consideration when one does make that request. And sometimes, unfortunately, the circumstances are not within one of those categories to speed up a case.
All right, I see a question regarding tuition assistance for asylees. Someone said that they're interested in going in for a registered nursing program and are asking whether there's tuition assistance or benefits for asylees. So unfortunately, there's no specific scholarships or tuition assistance included inherently within asylee benefits through a resettlement agency. There may be separate scholarships, such as those funded by private foundations or nonprofits. What I would suggest doing if you're interested in registered nursing is one, definitely connecting with the employment services program at the resettlement agency that you enroll in, because they do have job training programs, and they also may be familiar with what are those registered nursing programs in your specific area. I happen to know that for the person asking this, since they're in our own local area, that I believe there's a nursing program tied into the local free English classes program for asylees. So that would also be something to look at through your local community college. So I see another question for you here, Cynthia, and this is a question that we always get during the orientations. which is when would I be able to apply for additional family members to join me, like siblings or parents, right? So family members that are not a spouse or dependents.
So I'm going to answer this and answer the question that Jonathan asked earlier, sort of in one response. And that is that immigration law becomes so, what they say, nuanced, that this is a time when you need to really have a consultation with an immigration legal service provider. And the reason why I say that is because there are so many rules and so many exceptions to the rules that it really needs to be answered on a case-by-case basis. So, for example, when one is talking about petitioning other family members, sometimes the person must be a lawful permanent resident for a particular category, and then for other categories, the person has to be a US citizen. So I do think that it is helpful to have a consultation with an attorney who specializes in immigration law, so that person can in fact advise you, or, of course, attorney, as well as a DOJ, Department of Justice accredited representative who works in a nonprofit, for example, can advise the person of the person's options with respect to bringing family members here. And those people can also advise you on what to do when the process hasn't gone as smoothly. Just for example, whether it's no I-94, whether it's how do I prepare for the future for my, relatives to come here. There's so many categories of responses to those questions that I do think that that's when it's good to consult someone who's an expert in the field to give you advice that's specific to your situation.
All right, so I see someone just wrote in a question about whether someone with an approved asylum status can apply for FAFSA, or do you have to be a permanent resident? So I'm glad someone asked this because I just checked on it the other day. And if you go on the FAFSA website, it does list asylee or refugee status as one of the eligibility categories in order to apply for FAFSA.
And I would also just add to, and Amy, you probably know about this more than I do, but there are some private schools that may have specific private funding or private sources of funding that could help with tuition and expenses, academic expenses.
Yes, absolutely. And I always encourage people to do a bit of a Google search for also external scholarships, particularly in the case of asylees or refugees. There may be, scholarships specific to that status. So you never know. When you research a bit, you may find some additional opportunities, both within the institution that you're looking to apply for, as well as externally.
Oh, Amy, I just wanted to circle back and just add that HIAS does provide legal intakes where we do screening. So for people who would like additional help or like to speak to a HIAS attorney, we do conduct intakes every first Friday or most of every month. So there are sometimes months, like for example, last month, November, we did take a break, but generally speaking, we provide intakes from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on the telephone with the New York as well as the Silver Spring offices.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. I see someone who's in the DC area asked how HIAS could help. So that would be the answer for that is HIAS holds legal consultations on the first Friday of every month. And there should be a site on HIAS's website that lists all the phone number information. So feel free to reach out on the next first Friday of the month, which is coming up very soon. This Friday,
Yes.
actually.
Yes.
All right, well, I don't see any more questions. I don't know, Cynthia, if you saw if I missed one or not.
I think there's one from Shahid, moving from New York to Maryland.
Oh, yeah, I answered that one earlier.
Oh, you
He's one
did.
of our
Okay.
AOP clients. So
Thank you.
for him, your caseworker will be in touch shortly. They just haven't reached out to you quite yet, but you will know who they are soon. I promise. So with that, I don't see any additional questions coming in. So thank you all for joining us today. I hope you learned some useful information. Our contact information is on the screen if you think of any additional questions later. I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone with the link to the recording of this presentation, this slideshow, as well as additional materials and links from the Asylee Outreach Project. We do hold these orientations once every other month. Our next one is already up on our website, actually, and it's scheduled for January 30th. So please share that information with anyone who would benefit from attending one of these. And with that, thank you again for listening, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week. And take care.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Cynthia.